Welcome everybody to the November 1st meeting of Marine Conservation League's Land Use, Transportation and Water Committee. We have a wonderful agenda this morning. Joining us will be Jack Leibster, the former Marin County planning manager. I'm going to move forward and get started and introduce Jack. So most of you know Jack. Probably all of us know Jack, but I just wanted to give a quick introduction to Jack. So Jack retired from Marin County's Marin County's advanced planning manager in charge of sea level response, updating the local coastal plan, and implementing the award-winning countywide plan, among other initiatives. He's a founding class member of UC Santa Cruz's Environmental Studies program. He built upon his Environmental Studies Biology double major with positions with the EPA, the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, ESA Consulting, and Tahoe's California TRPA. Jack, what is TRPA?
Tahoe Regional Planning Agency.
For more than 25 years, Jack served with the Coastal Commission, doing projects and coastal plans statewide, and as Public Affairs Director, he was instrumental in creating and growing the Coastal Cleanup Day, which MCL participates in every year, the Adopt a Beach program, and the extraordinarily successful Whale Tail license plate, which has produced $100 million to date for environmental restoration. Jack was also City of Half Moon Bay Planning Director and on the State Coastal Conservancy staff, where he worked on stream wetland restoration projects, including Los Angeles's Bologna wetlands. So with that, today, Jack is gonna just talk about his experiences at the county and his work on CSMART, and we'll explain what that is.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I thought I would talk a little bit more about kind of how I got to where I was when I retired and where I am today. A little more detail on my background. Well, back at the beginning when I was in high school, and let's see if I can advance this. There we go. It was in 1967, and Frank Shivo here was my physics teacher in high school. And he was green before it was cool to be so. He would show movies on alternate Wednesdays. One week it was auto racing. He had a Chevy Nova that he souped up and would race, though shortly after I graduated, he converted that to propane. But the other week he would show films on conservation. And that's sort of where I began to get my environmental consciousness. It's where I learned about what was happening with the Four Corners power plants on the Navajo Nation and what happened to Glen Canyon Dam. So Frank went on to teach environmental studies at San Jose State. He kind of added a fourth R to the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, and that was refuse. He said if it can't be cycled or composted, don't buy it. And he prided himself on not creating any garbage. And this took him created an issue with the city council when he refused to pay his garbage bill because he wasn't creating anything more than a handful of garbage that he got rid of in the school's dumpster. But his activities planted a seed in me, as it did for many, many others. Now, some of you are too young to remember what it was like back around that time. The environmental insults of the late 60s. The Cuyahoga River in Cleveland actually caught fire, and actually did that 7 different times. In 1969, the Santa Barbara oil spill occurred, and air pollution in San Jose, where I lived, was so thick sometimes I couldn't see the full length of a block. It was a really different time. And in Christmas, 1968, astronaut William Anders of Apollo 8 sent this picture, which is now called Earthrise, back to us here on the planet, and we could all see just how beautiful and how finite our Earth was. I went to UC Santa Cruz, and in 1970, it was the first Earth Day on April 22nd, and I was a participant. I also started the Ecology Action chapter on campus and took on recycling all the aluminum soda cans that were being generated. I had the brilliant idea of taking the cans and putting them in the dump truck compactor so that they could be nicely mashed together and more easily handled. Well, that didn't work. But the dump truck driver was good enough that we spread out all the cans and he ran over them with the dump truck and smashed them that way. Shortly thereafter, in a couple of rooms in the Cowell Health Center on campus, the UCSC Environmental Studies program was founded, and I became part of that founding class. Dick Cooley, shown here in this photo, was the founder of the program, which was just one of 5 in the entire country. He recruited a number of young and energetic faculty members like Jim Pepper and Gary Griggs, who I'm sure many of you know, that became my mentors. At the national level, the Environmental Protection Agency was created by a reorganization plan approved by President Nixon, bringing together a number of departments from various other agencies around the government. And it was run by the new EPA administrator, William Markelshaus. It was charged with carrying out new laws that were signed by President Nixon, including the Clean Air Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. One of the strengths of the Environmental Studies program was its internships. So in the summer of 1972, I went to work for Bill as part of the National Youth Advisory Board in Washington, D.C. It was still a time of great legal ferment about the environment. The Clean Water Act of 1972 was being legislated. There was a National Land Use Policy Act, a National Land Use Planning Act, that was a comprehensive integrated approach to environmental protection, but it failed to be passed by Congress. However, the Coastal Zone Management Act of 1972, which took some of those same principles and applied them only to the coastal zone of the country, was enacted, and that became particularly relevant to me. So one of the main themes of our environmental studies projects was coastal legislation in California. We had a workshop that was titled, "You Can't Legislate Morality, but You Can Save the Coast." And we prepared testimony and lobbied legislators. And when it became clear that a coastal bill would not get through the legislature after 3 years, we threw our energies into Proposition 20, an initiative that we collected signatures for, and when it came onto the ballot, knocked on doors to help get it passed. And that's how the Coastal Commission began. So one day in the last semester of my tenure on campus, the Environmental Studies Office got a job announcement for planning positions with the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, a council of governments for the 3 counties around Monterey Bay. My environmental studies colleague, Jeff Griggs, who is the brother of Gary Griggs, and I both applied and we were both hired. And I spent 3 years at AMBAG, which was kind of a graduate planning school for me because we worked on a number of different plans, including transportation, housing, resource recovery, and growth management. I became aware of a section of the Federal Clean Water Act that really hadn't been broadly implemented at the time. So I wrote a grant application under Section 208, which got us $900,000 to take on one of the first efforts to manage non-point source pollution into our waterways. So AMBAG was a voluntary association of governments and didn't have any direct authority of its own. Several of my colleagues from environmental studies had gone to work for the Coastal Commission, and I saw that they were having a real impact. So I applied and was hired into the San Francisco office, where I carried out special studies, handled coastal permits, and worked on several local coastal plans. And indeed, I was able to have an impact. For example, when PG&E came in for a new facility at Diablo Canyon, I asked to take on that permit. PG&E had a public exclusion zone that prohibited public access to 12 miles of a magnificent part of the coast in San Luis Obispo. And public access was a fundamental part of the Coastal Act. After years or after months of tough negotiations and legal wrangling, we were able to open up what is now called the Pecho Coast Trail. And regular docent tours now are available from the restored Point San Luis lighthouse out 4 miles of spectacular coastline to Rattlesnake Canyon. Maybe not the place you would think you want to go, but it's very beautiful, and it's been a very popular program to have access to that otherwise restricted area. Another project, as an example, was the replacement of the old Noyo Harbor Bridge in Fort Bragg. Some of you who've seen the movie Overboard might recognize this bridge. It was featured in that movie. Here, the issue was the design of the bridge railings that Caltrans intended to construct. They would have cut off and blocked views from the bridge, and local citizens were up in arms. One thing that I heard is that surfers would drive over the bridge and be able to check out the surf and see what they, how they want to plan to do their surfing that day. And it was those views were well regarded and very important to folks. And it turned out that an old engineer in Caltrans who had the final say was dead set against anything other than these alternatives that Caltrans was offering. So to offset the impact on views, we required Caltrans to fund the purchase of these cliffs right near the bridge and make them available for public access and for public viewing. And that later became the Pomo Bluffs Park that is an important feature of it now in Fort Bragg. And as things happened, it took a lot longer to get that bridge design finalized. And that particular engineer retired, and Caltrans came around to the original design of the see-through barrier that we had proposed. So we got our park and we got our view too. It's one of the nice accomplishments that I feel pretty proud of. On the local coastal planning end of things, which obviously became important when I got here to the county, I worked on the Bolsa Chica plan, which was for one of the last remaining large open space areas in Southern California. It had already been a 25-year controversy about oil drilling, urban development, and wetlands, and I learned a lot about wetland restoration as part of that project. Another theme I was involved in local coastal planning was agriculture, such as that here in San Mateo County. That experience also became very valuable to me when I got to Marin County. In the 1980s, the Coastal Commission was embroiled in a lot of controversy and was getting, frankly, bad press, in addition to having its budget cut by 1/3 by the then Governor George Deukmejian. I took on the role of the Director of Public Affairs, hoping to get more of a positive story out. And one of my main initiatives, and something that I'm still very proud about, as was mentioned, is getting the Coastal Cleanup Day going and growing it over the years to promote stewardship of the coast. It's in the Guinness Book of Records as the largest beach cleanup, but it's important because it gets tens of thousands of people out to have an experience where they can actually make things better. As part of the coastal cleanup and Adopt a Beach programs, we developed a coastal curriculum for kindergarten through to the 12th grade that's still in use today. And one of the major successes was getting the whale tail license plate qualified for being issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles. We had to pre-sell, before the plate was even developed, we had to pre-sell 5,000 plates at $90 a piece to qualify for having it produced by the DMV. And we were able to do that. And up until this point, we're now at somewhat over $120 million that it's produced for environmental programs in the state. At that time, I also sort of got tired of trying to correct or change projects that were, already set in stone when they came to through the permit process. So I wanted to get in on the ground floor of creating projects that would enhance and restore the environment. And I was able to be hired by the Coastal Conservancy. And so some of the typical projects that I was involved with included the restoration of San Mateo Creek on the Marine Corps Camp Pendleton facility, where we had to schedule our visits to the creek around the live fire of the training programs that they had. Also worked on removing a dam on Topanga Creek and enhancing water quality in Malibu Lagoon. And I worked on another of the other large open spaces left in Southern California, Ballona Lagoon. And in working on that, I had the great fortune to work with Jeremy Lowe, who many of you know, and he's become very key to the work that's being done in Marin County. So as a result of the work that I was doing in San Mateo County, I was approached by members of the City of Half Moon Bay City Council to become the planning director. And I worked on implementing the city's growth management plan and water supplies issues, and dealing with the legacy of hundreds of tiny antiquated lots, as well as a proposed new bypass to facilitate a major development on one of the subdivisions in the city. But as the political pendulum swung to the pro-growth side, it was no longer comfortable for me to work there. So I came to Marin County and began working on the local coastal program amendments, which again covered a broad variety of issues that exist on the shoreline. And I'm sure that members of the of MCL are familiar with many of these issues. But in the early part of 2014, I heard about a workshop that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration staff was giving about the subject of sea level rise. It was a 2-day workshop at the Marconi Center, and I certainly thought it was something that the county should be engaged with. I found that the sea level rise work would qualify for grant funds that the State Coastal Conservancy had available, and we started that process and began the process of developing a response to sea level rise in the adaptation program along this general approach that we've maintained. As many of you know, the modeling that we've utilized in order to identify the issues of sea level rise came from work of both the USGS and especially Patrick Barnard, who's shown here, who took global climate models and drove modeling down to the regional wave models that then were scaled down to local hazards that we used to identify what would be happening in the future with sea level rise. And many of you know that sea level rise is made up of many different parts of the ocean and wave environment. For example, flooding related to storms can cause an interim rise in sea level and sort of show us a picture of what's going to be the permanent situation that we have coming at us in the future. So one of the things that we did was using information available from the county and information that we gained from the public as well, identified what we called assets, all the things that could be affected by sea level rise, and prepared a series of maps that showed where these would be affected in the future using a program developed by Point Blue called Our Coast, Our Future. And that was really a major, the coming together of all those elements really allowed us to do the planning and analysis that is necessary to predict and identify the kinds of problems that we'll be facing as sea level does rise. We kicked off the public part of our process in July of 2014, and it was very important for us to get public involvement going, both to identify the susceptibility of areas to sea level rise and begin to get people thinking about the kinds of changes that would be necessary in order to adapt to that those changing conditions. And here you see our game of floods that Roger Leventhal and several of us put together to facilitate the understanding of sea level rise among the public. we also thought it was very important to get that understanding out to younger people who will face more of the issues as they grow in the future, and will have a much tougher time than we elderly folk will necessarily see. So we developed the maps that showed where sea level rise was likely to occur and at the intensity that it was happening, and put out our vulnerability assessment that showed that at the turn of the century, more than 1,000 homes are likely to be inundated along the coastline. And we did the Chris Chu took on the process of doing that same type of analysis with the consultant that we had used on the base side. And because of the much more intense development on the base side, 12 times as many homes would be affected. Then the next question was, so what are we going to do about it? And we were able to get a grant to look at what we call living shorelines, adaptation along the shoreline of Tamales Bay, building beaches, building wetlands that could absorb some of the sea level rise that was predicted to occur. And on the Stinson Beach side, we looked at adaptation possibilities, including the development of constructed dunes to be a bulwark against sea level rise. This is a typical schematic of such a dune, and you'll notice in the middle there, the cobble berm is a feature that would be added in a constructed dune to help protect the dunes from erosion with both normal fluctuation of the sea level and from storms. Actually, in Stinson Beach, this is the area down where the south of the beach area where the overflow parking is, and you can see that dunes are naturally beginning to form there. So that gives an indication that this might be a strategy that could be helpful. In the summer, the beach builds up, and here you can see that it actually, in the area of sea drift where there's an existing rock revetment, it covers a good part of those rocks. But as the winter storms erode the sand into a sandbar offshore, those rocks are again revealed. But that's a time when there are many fewer people using the beach, so it might be an acceptable situation. In the January storms of this year, earlier this year, there was a tremendous loss of beach, which calls into question whether beach dunes can really be effective in protecting the shoreline. But we were somewhat surprised that just a month later, the sand had returned in a good part to that area. So right now, our consultants and Environmental Science Associates is looking at the costs and effectiveness of dune formation as well as raising structures. We don't think that this height of structure is actually necessary. This was done before there was more accurate information about sea level rise and flooding, and we're expecting that report pretty soon to see what the conditions are that we'll need to take into account in future decision making. But the final decisions about what will happen along the shoreline here in Marin on the coast side will in fact be heavily influenced, if not outright made, by the Coastal Commission, which has been heavily involved in restricting seawalls and trying to eliminate seawalls up and down the coast. And so everything that will be proposed will have to go through the commission for their final approval. So I hope that this wasn't too boring, but it's kind of is how I got to where I am today. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of that history, as well as where we are today with sea level rise. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack. That was a great presentation. I'm wondering if anybody has any burning questions to start us off, or also I'm going to put Chris on. Okay, Nona. Go ahead, Nona.
Oh, okay. Jack, I particularly love the history part because I've been trying to reconstruct. I'm a number of years, good many years older than you, but I sort of entered the environmental arena in the late
Yeah.
60s. And
it was definitely a walk down memory lane doing
oh
this.
God, yeah, absolutely. Everything familiar except for your experience, of course, which diverges from mine. But it's wonderful to take people back who really weren't around during that time to go through those seminal years of the late 60s and into the 70s, and to see what progress was being made. So I love the history and love the most recent information also. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one thing that we can take from that is, I mean, it really is remarkable how bad things were back in the late 60s and how we were actually able to make progress and achieve some gains. So I think that's something we can remember as we go forward with the challenges that we have today. That we can do better.
If there are any other hands, I'm having a hard time seeing everybody.
Vicky.
Vicky?
Yeah. Who do I talk to?
The owl.
Okay.
Owl.
Hey, hello, Jack. Good to see you. It's Vicky.
Hi.
I wanted to follow up on one of your last statements about I guess the preference of the Coastal Commission not allowing seawalls to make a broad statement. Is that going to push an effort for planners or communities to consider one of the adaptations in Game of Floods to considering retreat? Is that being discussed at all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Retreat is certainly something that the commission has tried to incorporate in permits that it has given for new development along the shoreline. And basically, and this has happened for a number of permits along Stinson Beach. Basically, to get a permit, you have to record a document that says if your structure is damaged by sea level rise or storms, that you won't rebuild it, that you'll pay for removing it and restoring the area to natural conditions. And people have accepted, at least in Stinson Beach, a number of people have accepted that that condition. We'll see what happens if it comes to fruition. What goes on then? But I guess some people are just able to say, okay, if I get 10, 15 years out of this, that's good enough for me. I'm not in that position, but some people apparently are. So Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
George,
You're muted, George.
You're still muted, George.
George, you're muted.
let's see if I can unmute you.
I figured
You
it out.
did.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay, great.
So just so nice to see you, Jack. And
So great to see you too, George.
I'm from Marshall and active with the East Shore Planning Group, and we obviously have homes that are along that stretch near between Tony's and Hog Island Oyster Company there and Marshall Store that are vulnerable to sea level rise, and so coming up with adaptation plans has been really important to us, and Jack has been immensely helpful in his tenure at the county in learning himself what our challenges are and the possible solutions. He was able to get a grant for the study of the various techniques that are used now and have been used since the railroad was built in the 1870s to protect the shore from sea level rise, and mostly that's riprap and various coastal armoring that has protected those homes and the highway for that matter for forever. So and we're greatly indebted to Jack for all of his work in translating some of our concerns to regulations or proposed regulations, and in a sense being a voice with the Coastal Commission that we really can't have ourselves. So I do want to mention that as in terms of thanks. Regarding the religious conviction of the Coastal Commission that thou shalt never have coastal armoring, there's one key thing, which is as part of the statute of the Coastal Act, which was enacted knowing full well that there are many structures along the coast that did have coastal armor. And there's a specific provision that says that you may, if necessary, you may reinforce that, or those aren't the words, but you can maintain that with proper mitigation. And so that is the reason why we're hopeful that as the sea level rise, and simply as part of maintenance, the various parts of the East Shore, and I'm sure other areas that deteriorate with the sea and will be subject to sea level rise, that we can maintain our homes for another 50 or 100 years or whatever's possible. So that's one of the counterpoints to the Coastal Commission's view that there cannot be any coastal armoring anymore, or without specific penalties, essentially, for agreeing to their permit conditions. I just wanted to mention that. We can follow up at some point. Thanks, Jack, for being here and for all your work over many, many years, and for crawling under the houses with us.
Thank you, George.
Chris, did you have a question?
I did, thank you. Jack, I'm Chris Yolanis, work quite a bit with businesses in Marin on sustainability roadmaps, and SLR vulnerabilities is part of that work. But I'm curious about funding sources for commercial property especially, as well as residential property owners, and what your thoughts are as far as where as much as $10 billion plus dollars may be coming from over the next 30 years, which is, I think recently there was some estimates being made about what it'll cost, right, to deal and protect, especially private properties. So I was wondering, and maybe some others can chime in and tap the wisdom of the group here, but what are your thoughts about where funding will come from for private property owners affected by sea level rise?
Yeah, that's a huge question, because the numbers are so immense. We had kind of a bit of a down payment with the the Infrastructure Act that was passed about a year ago through Congress, many billions of dollars on retention and repair of infrastructure. But I can't really say that there's going to be ample funds available for all of this. A lot of it is going to have to be self-generated, I think, down the line. So it's important to pick up strategies that are not only effective but also fundable. It's becoming increasingly clear that we can't always turn to state and federal funding to support these kind of activities. So, there will be undoubtedly billions of dollars available, but the need is so great that there's going to be a big gap there. So I wish I could be more hopeful about that, but it's going to be tough.
Hmm.
Jack, go ahead, Susan.
Jack, are there areas in Marin County that have, that are vulnerable, that are cliff type situations? We recognize that there are a lot of low-lying areas, but are there any areas of cliff erosion that are being a problem?
Yeah, we will be. That's one of the things that I understand that the planning department wants to look at in the upcoming months and years. Luckily, we don't have a lot of development on top of cliffs, but in the Bolinas area, certainly that's an issue. And so we've already seen that erosion at the base of the bluff can lead to weakening of the bluff and puts some of that bluff top and bluff side development at risk. It's also true in some of the other areas. Luckily, a lot of our cliffs are in state and national parks, so they haven't been developed, and we've been able to avoid that problem. But even in a place like Muir Beach, in the long term, the toe of that bluff is susceptible to erosion, and that could become a problem. That was an issue in one of the permits that was recently approved by the Coastal Commission in that area.
Jack, you've had a quite an amazing history. I'm wondering how you plan to stay involved, or how you plan to contribute your experience and expertise going forward. Are you tracking anything? In retirement, how do you put that history to good use?
Well, I have to say that I've been more involved with taking care of things that around the house that I've avoided for the past 40 years at this point.
That sounds familiar.
So
Yeah.
I'm developing new skills. It's great. I've refinished and restained our deck. It's a big accomplishment in my book. And then cleaning out the garage. These are things that that need to be addressed. But I will try to put my hand to some of the issues that Marin Conservation League is taking on, and I think as the premier conservation organization in the county, anything I can do to help there would be great, and I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nona,
Yeah, along the way, Jack, I'm not certain how much more you've done with the graphic history that you put together for today, but you really need to do an oral history. I'm not certain whether you've done one yet, but this is extremely valuable information. It's lovely. It's wonderful to see it done graphically, but that needs to be memorialized. So are you doing that with the history room?
I haven't been doing that yet.
It's
Maybe now that
important to do it.
okay, I'll look into that.
I sort of waited till late. I finally did one, but you need to, that what you did along the coast is of enormous interest to build up to what you're able to do now and what the county has done and what others have done. So take time to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Chu.
Oh, no.
Chris, do you still have your, I
No,
didn't know if your hand was still up.
Sorry, no, I'll lower it.
Okay,
Thank you.
Chris. Chu.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Jack. That really was amazing to hear. I had no idea. I knew a little bit about your career path prior to coming to the county, but I certainly want to second the importance of somehow documenting all that history. Glad this meeting was recorded, but definitely should do more. I also just wanted to make a point that Jack was really instrumental in setting up Baywave and getting it started. So Jack kind of glossed over that and kind of said that I was involved in doing it, but all of that work was set up by Jack for both the coast and the Bay. And so the legacy, even though the programs are always split, all the thinking and the thought and the focus on building partnerships was really all in Jack's court. And so just wanted to give him that credit as part of the Sea Lori's history in Marin.
Thank you very much. And what you've done with it has just been tremendous. So I really appreciate that.
Okay, any other questions? We have about, let's see, what time is it? We have a few minutes left. Anybody has any further questions for Jack?
What's
Well-
the next house project?
What'd you say?
What's the next project at home?
Yeah.
I've got a garage.
Walk the dog or something easy, Jack.
Okay, well, we appreciate you coming, Jack, and putting together that presentation. Really interesting, and valuable to understand the history that goes into the accomplishments, at the other ends. Just your inspiration and how you proceeded.
Well,
throughout.
thank you all for listening. It was kind of fun going back over it. So I'll take Nona's suggestion and see what I can do to document it. Thanks all, and I will.
Thank you, Jack.
I'll be